Afternoon all. A very tense final day at the Gashimov Memorial, round 10. Magnus Carlsen equal points to Caruana, and they're playing each other in the final round. Magnus playing white. Could he get revenge? Caruana beat him earlier in the tournament. So kicking off with the white pieces, Magnus played d4, and we see knight f6, and now a very solid move here. Knight f3. This is actually second most popular to c4, so not committing to c4. And black now played g6. Magnus again not committing to c4, plays g3. So has he got some naughty trick with the c pawn, you might think, up his sleeve, or is he going to move the c pawn even? The tension mounts here regarding the c pawn. So bishop g2. Now black played here c5. Now in this position, white does not usually want to take this c-pawn in this position. This is perfectly okay for black, just to play queen a5 check and get the pawn back safely. So in this position, very safe. It's safe enough. So usually players with white here, actually the most common move is just c4 or castling. Magnus actually played c3, slightly rarer, but fourth down. And now this changes the picture. This diagonal is actually protected from the check. There's no longer a queen a5 check resource here. That's something to be borne in mind. And given that, actually, there is actually a threat now of d takes c5. And if we could touch into the philosophy of d takes c5, why would you want to play d takes c5? I mean, seriously, if you're not like materialistic, why is d takes c5 a pawn you'd be interested in? Because usually players with black, actually the top move is actually queen c7 in the live book. Some players have castled here and ignored it. Some have played knight a6, some have taken or played queen b6. So those casting are ignoring it, of course, and usually players with white do not play d takes c5 here. They usually castle, and now black protects this c pawn, usually with queen c7 or knight a6. A bit rarer is d5, so it becomes a kind of positional sacrifice. Okay, so in the game, though, here, in this position, after c3, black actually played d5, and this is quite unusual, actually. So, playing d5 here is actually quite interesting for d takes c5. So, and this is actually what Magnus played. The thing is, this is a bit like a reverse Slav defense, where white can actually play b4 and trying to cling onto it. The extra pawn, okay, might not be a great pass pawn, but it actually supports d6. If black wants to counteract in the center later, you'll notice that d6 could be useful for protecting an outpost piece. So it is potentially a useful pawn. It's a dark square grip. And also by capturing away, you might think e5 is weakened, but sometimes something like bishop f4 and e5 could help dominate quite a few dark squares, more than just the pawn on d4. By taking there, it's actually eyeing quite a few dark squares in black's position. So there are some perks to winning this pawn here. It's if so the pros and cons of this are going to be tested now by this game. Both sides now castle, and here. Already, if black tries knight a6 to try and regain the pawn, this is a good test if b4 would work, because you might think, well, the diagonal, is there pressure on the diagonal? From an engine point of view, this is not quite working for black. Knight e4, queen b3 seems sufficient here in this position to protect things, but also even knight d4 is possible. If black tries to get rid of the knight, like go to b5, and this apparently this is okay for white. It's actually a good advantage for white technically. So there are some difficulties to actually regain this pawn with knight a6. Another option is also queen b3 here. So say knight c7, and this is where the dark square grip could be demonstrated with bishop f4 to e5, and it looks as though white just simply stands better in this sort of position. And you might also think d5 is going to be weaker later. You know, maybe the knight moves like this and then like this, and d5 is a bit weak as well. So it is basically a pawn up, but it is a double pawn, of course, but it does some stuff. Now Fabiano Caruana played a5 here, so he's trying to inhibit white from playing b4. It seems like a very interesting way of doing it, maybe to attack the pawn later somehow. So now Magnus actually plays a move which Houdini thinks actually to go for c4 here, which is interesting, but Magnus's move is extremely interesting. He's not too keen on that. He plays bishop e3, trying to maintain that pawn, and if you consider a knight coming to d6 later, if this pawn was attacked later, well, it's already protected. And you might think, well, a knight g4 here? On knight g4, I think bishop c1 should be okay, but that's an interesting move, knight g4. So if knight a6, knight e1, hitting d5, and if knight f6, knight d3, so some little finesses, and white could still be holding on to c5 here. So it's quite a serious issue. So after bishop e3, actually knight c6 was played, and it looks as though black's compensation with e5, you know, the centre pawns, looks quite impressive in theory. But what about the d6 issue? Magnus actually plays knight a3. And this knight, by going on the side, is coming into the centre like this. It would be an octopus knight if e5 is played on d6. An octopus, as in the classic Karpov-Kasparov game where Kasparov had a knight entrenched on d3. A knight on d6 does seem quite painful. Black here now might also be concerned about a later b4 from white as well, or knight d4. So anyway, the move played here is actually a4. This does seem some sort of operation against trying to discourage a future b4 with the en passant, to try and get an exchange of rooks and put the queen on an unfortunate, potentially unfortunate diagonal. So it seems, you know, a space gainer, gives black also some extra squares tactically, like a5. But queen c1 was played here, and now we see black indeed playing e5. So it's celebrating more central control, it seems, in terms of occupation. But the hypermoderns taught us that occupation is not the end of the story here. When control can sometimes be better than occupation. But literally, black does seem to occupy more of the centre with pawns at the moment. But now pressure against d5 is evident after rook d1, and knight c4 is on the cards because that pawn is pinned to the queen. Knight c4 would add even more pressure to e5, or the knight could even look at going to b6. Black steps out of that pin with queen e7. And now knight b5. The knight's going into d6 without worrying that it's going to be taking. The bishop's protecting this at the moment. You might think, well, can this bishop be chased away with knight g4 here? Let's have a quick look. Knight g4. No, it fails just simply to rook takes d5. Weakness of the last move, you can't really do this. Knight takes e3. White's best to take with the queen. So that's one of the ideas as well of queen coming to c1. And that's ideal for white. So this is annoying. The knight's coming to d6. So black now played bishop e6. And now, actually, instead of knight d6 immediately, we see knight g5, aiming for that light square bishop, which actually moves now to g4. And you might think, well, doesn't Magnus have to react to this bishop g4? He plays an absolutely fantastic move, which is knight d6 totally fantastic idea that the knights are actually looking at f7 here, and if bishop takes e2, this wasn't played. Actually, white has a very, very interesting move. I wonder if you can guess it. If I gave you 10 seconds here, what would you play with white? 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, rook takes d5. This is Magnus's idea. Fantastic. So an exchange set with tons of compensation. So white is on that f7 pawn. This is very, very dangerous. And if intermediate like h6, then white can actually just play rook d2. Magnus pointed this out, and that'd be great. Then, so here the knight can drop back either to f3, h3, or even go back to e4 with advantage. So a fantastic concept here already. Knight d6 here, allowing e2 to drop because of rook takes d5. Black played h6, and now Magnus dropped the knight back to f3. So he's got that entrenched knight. And you might think, well, can it be undermined with, say, b6, tactically b6? I'm not sure. b6 is mentioned by the engines, actually, but knight e1. Looking at bishop takes d5 again. And if bishop takes e2 here, then again, rook takes d5 is again strong here, this exchange sack, for slightly different reasons. So what does black actually do here? He's going to end up losing the b6 pawn if he's not careful. If this knight goes somewhere, this looks as though something horrible is going on. We're kicking the bishop first. Actually, knight takes f7 is quite strong here. So yeah, these horrible things can happen if black tries to play b6 to get rid of this entrenched knight tactically. It doesn't seem that's on the cards here. Black played king h7. Having to tolerate this octopus knight is a pain, I guess. h3, bishop e6. And now Magnus played b4, so he doesn't mind the en passant or the queen on this diagonal. And this seems to signal something important opportunity if the queen is on a1. As we're about to see, let's have a look at this. Rook takes a1, queen takes. You see that the queen is in the firing line of the bishop. And after the game, well, there's an option relating to this. At the moment, it's but black's move here. d4 is out of the question to try and play d4 here. It's under white's control of all the pieces, basically d4. But after knight e4, Magnus actually released control of the d4 square a little bit, challenging this knight, which is also looking at his d6 knight. He just actually played knight d2, and it does seem possible that d4 is an option to look at. Magnus mentioned d4 as an option, or just taking on d6. So there are two major options, and it's here at move 20 that kind of, I think the first controversial move, highly controversial, was played. The engines don't like it at all. Black actually played f5, and it seems to leave white with a clear advantage. Let's just quickly just check these other options. d4, so white's released control of that from that retreat. Here, if we look at bishop takes, d takes, f takes, this looks terrible structurally, and it looks as though also white's king is a bit in trouble. After knight f3, bishop d7, it doesn't seem as though black should be in trouble here. Even if he loses b7, it looks as though black is potentially brewing something quite dangerous here, and white does seem to be having to tread carefully. Say this variation, it looks as though black has got dangerous compensation, and this diagonal is also interesting. In fact, the engine assesses this now as equal, so going through this engine line, because it looks as though with the double pawns here, white has king safety issues, which could lead to an issue. This is a long way off, but it seems d4 carries with it some promises of a good position. If bishop takes e4 is not played, say c takes, e takes, this does look as though the bishop is staring at the queen rather advantageously here. And you know, what does actually white do? If bishop f4, then this looks horrible, d3. And actually given as much better for black, this position. With a queen sack in mind, white's having to play a queen sack to so that's like totally disastrous. There's a technical move here, bishop takes h6. The engine's giving crazy. Okay, but it's on e4, that's the point. And if d3 now, we can just take checkmate that bishop. Knight takes, f takes. This apparently is equal or slightly better for black potentially. So this is a very, very interesting option which seems to have been missed in this game. That d4 here seems actually really quite logical because the bishop hasn't got that many squares. The knight's also stopped the bishop coming back. The other option, of course, is knight takes d6. That's another one. Very, very interesting option that black had here in this particular position at move 20. Knight takes d6, c takes. If queen d7, both players reckon bishop c5 would be okay, and the engine likes that a little bit as well. Only a small advantage though for white. This bishop looks good on this diagonal staring at the queen. It doesn't look as though that's a very, very useful pawn at the moment, and the engine's actually coming down about equal here. So that was very, very interesting as well. On the other hand, if queen takes d6, then black could get in a bit of trouble because of knight c4. And I guess this goes in with the intention Magnus had that he's going to be a bit better here. This position looks like a lot of pressure on d5, and in fact bishop takes d5 to follow up with e4 looks good. If bishop takes, then this is better for white, say knight e3. It looks as though it's better for white. But yeah, it seems as though black may have missed an opportunity after this knight fd2, a kind of weakness in the last move, for playing for d4. It would seem intuitively this is a nice idea if black can get it on, get it in. Before it was out of the question, everything was on d4, but instead now black lashes out with f5. So this could be a major technical turning point of the game, actually, in my opinion, playing f5 here. It sharpens things up, but it potentially can weaken black's king. It doesn't look as though black's king's weak at the moment with all these pieces around, but pawns never go backwards. And here we see now knight 2 takes e4. Now if f takes e4, d takes was played. If f takes, queen b1, and what is black actually doing here? So this gets out of the firing line of the bishop, and potentially now something like c4 is on the cards to undermine the structure here. So this doesn't seem to be that promising for black, this position in particular. Say knight d8 is an example, c4, d4, e4's terribly weak, and the pawns, they're not going backwards, and white ends up looking a lot better here. Looks like a very good position indeed. So basically f takes doesn't seem to have too much to it. So d takes, which you'd think means that the knight is now protected by the rook as well as the pawn. We see Magnus playing queen b1. He must have been very happy with this position. White is now potentially even undermining the structure with g4, because this is against the king here. This is a nice diagonal against the king, but also just b4 and then maybe b5 later at the right time. So black reacted here to going for an attack. He's desperately weakening e4 in the process. So this is like a burning the bridges type attack. There's no going back here. So bishop d2, and now we see another forcing move from that e3. So black is trying to dent white's king safety. Bishop e1. The bishop is holding the fort here, it seems. If black takes here immediately, he didn't do this. This seems okay. It seems dramatic, but it seems like this sort of position seems white's going to be okay. just about. The king safety is okay. White's going to be better. It's a bit similar to the game. Bishop f5 was inserted, and so there's a temptation just to take here. This does seem possible as well, to take here, and then maybe I had to play g4. That looks very tempting as well. But Magnus ignored that for the moment. He just let himself be pushed around a little bit. He just moved the queen humbly, asking these pawns what they're doing there. And in fact, now black just played h5, so trying to damage white's king safety with a pawn sack in the center. So after f takes, bishop takes. These extra pawns, you know, they look like horrible, wretched double pawns, both of them, both pairs. But they control a lot of squares. I mean, this one controls d6. This one controls d4, f4. We've got a lot of squares covered by these double pawns, so they're not so bad. It's 2 pawns up, technically, but now we see queen g5. So black's trying to cast doubt on this whole approach from white. It seems even king h2 is possible though here, to be fair. It seems, you know, where is black's attack? If h4, bishop e1, e4, okay, this looks as though it should be dangerous. This is just a variation, but it seems, you know, the engine's not really impressed here. Queen d2, so what? Check. Where's the attack? The engine gives us a clear advantage. There doesn't seem to be anything concrete going on. So anyway, so here black actually, sorry, white didn't even play king h2. Just actually has got the option knight takes f5 as well. He's just actually played e4, and this punches a hole through black's dark squares, basically giving back a pawn to black, but it was a double pawn. So black doesn't clearly want to exchange off queens here. He plays queen takes g3, and even better than the immediate e takes f5 is first to evict the queen with rook d3. So Magnus played actually rook d3. On e takes f5, there might be something naughty going on with, say, bishop h6. But even here, white's apparently okay with either knight e4, hitting the queen, or fg first and then knight e4. So say knight e4. What is black actually doing? Takes. This seems okay for white. Very good for white. So anyway, but rook d3 is even better here, because now on bishop h6 that could be reacted to a queen takes, then rook takes g3. Very, very nice. So that's even more accurate. Rook d3. So that was played. Rook d3. The queen moves, and both players thought black was basically lost here. So white's kind of giving back a pawn after e takes, g takes, giving back a pawn, but now with e4, Magnus is blocking in the bishop. So these pieces are a bit more dead than they were. And even worse, the knight can come to f5 on f4. It seems f4 is potentially out of the question because of things like knight f5 here. The engine mentions knight f5 as a good advantage for white. Black would basically be forced to do this sort of thing, but here it seems nebulous compensation. But even better might be just to hold this position here, because as long as f3 is not coming in and not give this bishop any chance, white can actually just play b4 and then wait later with queen d1 and just build up the position. So it would be a sort of strategically dead position. The knight hasn't got any squares, f3 is not coming in fact it's been locked down, the d file's been locked down, then when the knight moves it's going to be rook d7. So white could just improve the position very easily here. It does seem strategically as though it's the end of black's any black counterplay there. The knight's doing actually a magnificent job in many directions here, as any octopus knight should be proud of doing. So anyway, So given f4 is out of the question, black actually played f takes e4. In fact, there's not much in it. The engine actually prefers f4 to this. Also, bishop h6 is an option. You'd think queen d2, and again, where is black's counterplay? It starts to look horrible. So anyway, f takes e4 was played, and we have bishop takes e4 check. And now Magnus plays queen e3. He dominates the position, and he's just reacted to any little threat from black, like queen f2 here with queen e3. We see rook f4, and now it looks as though, well, is black potentially got anything on the cards like this? Anything naughty? Doesn't seem as though there's too much on the cards. Bishop g2 was played, just holding the fort for a bit, and it just looks like black's not doing anything here at the moment. I mean, something like e4 can just be snapped off. Doesn't really help matters to do this. Say bishop h6, queen e2, and then what? Doesn't seem to be anything going on. Knight e5, white can start to play horrible things like this. So it doesn't seem as though here black's got too much counterplay either. Black played queen e7. We see queen e2 eyeing the h5 pawn. Queen goes back. b4 starting to improve the position now. And in fact, black does try e4 now, so it looks a bit desperate. But otherwise, white is just building up here. White's also got, of course, knight takes b7 to create two connected passed pawns and weaken c6. So e4, it's pretty desperate stuff. Knight takes knight e5. So we've had a look at similar thing to this. Rook d5, rook d6, these are invasion points. Magnus chooses rook d5, so he's tying down the knight to h5. Doesn't seem to be anything going on now. Also, the bishop's tied down to protecting the knight, so there's no bishop h6. I think this could be just snapped off. So black's pieces are pretty tied down here. Fabiano plays king g8. b5, these pawns, nice passed pawn on the way at some point, not quite now, the knight's holding it. Rook f5, but now black's gone into a self pin, and actually c6 is possible here using that pin. Perhaps instead of rook f5, say rook f8, might have been a bit more stubborn. But even so, white's going to improve his position slowly but surely. So rook f5 accelerates the queening of a pawn here after c6. B takes b6, b takes c6. Only 2 steps away. Queen e7. Then we see knight d6. Knight's pinned again. That unfortunate knight. So it's been 2 ways. Knight f3 check, you might think, is working here. It doesn't, because a bishop takes f3 protecting the queen. That's rather annoying. So black played rook g5. There's no cheapos here, it seems. There's no real threat from black. Knight b5 and now c7. There is a threat from white now to play c7 and queen as pawn. Queen e6. This hastens to the end. Check. Check. And now c7. The pawn is about to become a queen. Queen a6. Pawn queens. Here, what is black doing? He's just lost material. Basically, he's black queening. He's even worse off materially. If queen takes b5, well, white's got an extra queen. Queen e6 is apparently a forced mate in 15 in this position, with queen g8 to follow. So that's why that's a forced mate. Basically, that's pretty troublesome. So black tried queen a1 check. Okay, are there any cheapos here? If king h2, then this would be actually quite embarrassing for Magnus, and it would be very, very embarrassing. King h2. Can you spot why? If I give you 10 seconds here, what resource does black have in this position? So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, forcing moves to the rescue here. Knight F3 check is actually a mate, forcing a mate against white. If bishop takes, there's queen G1. And if queen takes, there's bishop E5. This is mate next move. So that would be pretty tragic, but Magnus, being the world champion, he spotted that cheapo and played king F2. Now, black's counterplay is running out quickly. Check. He plays now king E1, and there's no naughtiness here in sight. Now, black actually resigned here. I think we still have the implication of a forced mate. On queen takes b5, there's queen f5. This is actually the strongest here, queen here, threatening all sorts of things. So, you know, black's a queen down, of course. If check, rook d1, and that's been going on. If black wants to take this, then, well, white's a queen up, of course. Just wouldn't mind the exchange of queens here. Yeah. So yeah, Fabiano resigned. It was good to go for the last cheapo though. That would have been good from Fabiano's perspective to see king h2, but it didn't happen. So king f2, and then king e1, and here black resigned. Very, very interesting choice of opening by Magnus in this game to get that extra pawn, and the way he used it. And maybe there's a controversial talking point though in this game, that instead of what seems to be an outright controversial move, could have been replaced after knight fd2 with a kind of weakness of the last move in terms of d4. It does seem quite logical. There's logical things going on for it to play this d4 here. I think that's worthy of greater investigation in maybe a separate video at some point. Black seems to have a very interesting time here. It's something Fabiano himself said. He questioned why he didn't consider this much. I think it's a very, very interesting move, which could have been a different story. But as it was, so Magnus, by winning this game, has won the tournament. And that's his usual pattern. Even if he starts the tournament badly, he often ends up still with +2 or +3. That's what he mentioned as well in the press conference after, and it's true. That's what makes Magnus such a powerful world champion and tournament player. He has great resilience. So the 2 losses in a row he put aside and started winning games, and has won the tournament now. So a fantastic tournament, the Gashimov Memorial, and let's not forget the fantastic player it celebrates the life of. So Vasyl Gashimov, may he rest in peace. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.